The moment they stepped off the plane, a stirring feeling sent a chill down Grace Chambers' spine. There was a strangeness to Dead Horse that she had not been expecting, made all the more eerie that they were met by not a soul. Even for a small airport, and despite the heavy snows, there surely should have been someone waiting for them to land. The few hours of sunlight Dead Horse got in winter meant it looked more like twilight than the middle of the day. A wind blew like the breath of some angry god screaming from all directions. Grace buttoned her jacket up to its last hole and pushed her hands deep into her pockets. Strange elongated shadows threw down all around them as if they were the bones of some dead animal, and the cold ate at her as if it had fangs able to bite through her warmest clothing. This is what an alien planet would look like, she thought to herself. In front of her were Brent, then Charlie, and behind them, the two soldiers walked together, Elias and Smith. Grace took in the snow, her gaze to the small building in front of her. There hadn't been snowfall for 3 days, she thought. The runway was clear, but beyond it, the snow was powder of nearly a foot all the way to a small building that signaled the airport's terminal. Grace's stomach turned a tight knot as they walked into the building. Out of habit, or as an unconscious action, she brushed a hand over the holstered pistol that hung by her side. The door was closed, but Brent forced it open without too much trouble. Inside, the building could have almost been mistaken for the outside without the snow. There was no heating that Grace could feel, and the room was lit only by the light through the windows. They stopped in the middle of the room. "Where are the people?" Charlie said. That was the thought that had been on Grace's mind. "This is a small airport," Brent replied. "It only gets a few flights a week. I doubt many people spend time here unless they have somewhere to fly to as well." Elias had moved to the window, wiped the frost off it, and peered out. "There aren't any other planes that I can see," he said. In Dead Horse, the storm had been over for 3 days. Grace shook her head. "That makes no sense. The snow has no footprints on it." Smith Patterson looked tired from the flight. His bag hung limply off his shoulder. "What does that matter?" he quibbled. "Let's just find a bed for the night and be done with it." Grace gave him a glassy stare. "It hasn't snowed for 3 days here, and yet not a single footprint on the ground." "You don't find that strange?" Elias walked out of a door at the far end of the room and vanished into shadows. Charlie was looking around the room. "I have to agree, it seems odd that nobody has been in this place for 3 days. "It could be the storm, maybe it drove them indoors, just hunkered down," Smith remarked. "Maybe that's why there's been no communication from here for days." Elias walked in. "There's a truck out there with the keys in it." They left the building in single file. Outside was a 4x4, its driver's door open. Snow was now beginning to fall. Grace had watched Charlie glance around nervously in all directions as if they were being watched. "This vehicle been here a while?" Elias opened one of the back doors. "How can you tell?" Charlie stamped her foot into the ground, crushing snow. A foot of snow on the ground and no tracks. Brent had already gotten into the vehicle. "Come on," he said. "It'll be dark soon. We need to find somewhere to spend the night." "You're damn right about that," Smith said in agreement, shaking snow from his sleeves. Charlie had offered Grace the front seat as she had flown them, and she had not declined the offer. They drove, passing building after building. Most were just gray boxes with windows. What happened inside them was anybody's guess, but one thing they all saw were red stains rolling down a building. "Is that blood?" Charlie yelled from the back. "Stop the truck." Brent slammed the brakes and the truck skidded to a jarring halt. They all got out to examine it. "I'd swear that is blood," Smith said. The streak ran roughly 4 feet down the side of a wall. Grace thought it was blood as well. It certainly looked like blood. How would blood get onto a building like that? Brent moved closer for a better look. "Looks like something was thrown against it, then slid down." "That's a lot of blood," Charlie added. Elias didn't seem that concerned. "Could just be paint." Smith's voice came from behind them. "There's blood on these pipes as well." A few feet away, metal pipes a foot wide and 10 foot long were stacked on top of each other. "Well, that settles it then," Elias said with certainty in his voice. "Someone cut themselves on the pipes, probably their hand, and wiped it on the building." Grace looked at the blood on the wall, and then her eyes went to the pipes. "That doesn't make any sense," she said, leveling her eyes at Elias. "Look at the amount of blood. That's not some cut hand, and why would you risk infection wiping it on dirty, oily pipes?" She could see Brent and Charlie agreed with her. Smith looked on, shaking his head with an expression of grim dread across his face. "Not a goddamn soul," he uttered. "Not even a dog." Elias huffed. "Wouldn't leave a dog out in this weather unless it was a husky." "There's nothing more we can do tonight," Brent told them. "We'll get some rest and look at it with fresh eyes in the morning." They drove on, searching till darkness had taken the last light. "We need to find somewhere fast," Brent said with a slight panic in his voice. We're almost out of fuel. In the headlights, Grace spotted something large up ahead. There, she pointed. Those look like porta-cabins used by workers. I bet they're the sleeping quarters. Brent swung the truck around and pulled up outside. They bundled themselves inside out of the cold to find rooms with beds and a dining area. Smith and Elias wasted no time in searching the building. The flight had been long and day-tiring, and the cold had taken its toll on them all. No one's here, Smith told them when he returned. He's right, place is empty, Elias added. And it's damn cold, we can't find any heating and there's no electricity either. There's plenty of beds with blankets though. Smith held up a lovely brown jacket. Whoever lived here didn't even bother to take their clothes, suitcases full of them upstairs. Any food? Grace asked. Nothing we could find, Elias replied. A few dirty plates with scraps on them is about all. The soldiers looked disheartened by the whole ordeal. When they were ordered to come, they probably made the mistake of thinking it would be a couple of days away from their duties at the base. If that was the case, then Deadhorse had proved a sad awakening, and Grace had an odd feeling things would be even worse tomorrow. We're turning in for the night, Smith said as he and Elias left the room. Grace could hear the sound of boots tapping on wood as they climbed stairs. Shortly after Grace left, Charlie and Brent seated in cold conversation around a beam of a flashlight. Before she turned in for the night, she looked out the window. Heavy snow was falling, not a good sign if they needed to leave quickly. It was a loud crack that woke Grace in the pre-dawn. She was not sure how the others had slept, but she had suffered a distant, unsettled night, slipping in and out of consciousness as if waking from a coma before falling back to its clutches. There had been no heating in the building for at least a day and night, and the rooms had become nothing more than a frozen wasteland with walls. The water they had found inside was ice, entombed by wood and glass. Grace had taken an upper room with 4 beds. She scavenged blankets from other beds and bundled them over her in an attempt to ward off the cold. Still, she slept in clothes and the night was unmistakably miserable. Smith had bedded down in the room beside her and to her nuisance discovered the man snored worse than a hibernating bear. Twice he had woken to relieve himself, stumbled downstairs, emptied his bowels with the toilet door open before staggering back upstairs to bed. Between him and the unbounded cold, it was one of the worst nights she had ever had. Later in life, things would be far worse, but not only for her. Downstairs, Charlie and Brent had spoken late into the night. The odd sentence had woken her when spoken louder than the rest. Trails of blood, deserted buildings, vanished people. She wasn't sure if they had slept at all, and when she came downstairs, they were all waiting for her, eating the survival rations she had brought in from the night before. "Did you hear that before?" Charlie said. "It was gunfire." "I heard it," Grace said, taking a chocolate bar from the table. "Sounded distant to me," she said lightly. She stripped the wrapper and bit heartily into the sugar-coated sweet. Brent was buckling up his jacket. "We're going to find out what it is. Gunfire means somebody is alive out there." He looked at Grace. "We could use the help of the army." "I'm in the Air Force," was Grace's reply. Despite Grace not being a snob, having people think she was in the army was not acceptable. The sound of Smith's Parker being zipped brought a smile to Brent's face. "The sooner we find out what is going on here, the sooner we get out of this place," Smith said uneasily. Elias slapped him on the back in agreement. With the soldiers mucking in, there was little choice left for Grace. A small consolation was the exercise would help keep her warm, and Smith was right. Deadhorse was not a place any of them wanted to spend more time in than they had to. When they were outside, another rifle shot rang out and they all turned northward. "It came from near the sea," Brent said. "North." Over the last day, she had felt Brent take more control over the group. When he spoke, it was less of a request and more of a demand. While her orders were to fly the FBI to Deadhorse and back, there were no such orders that spoke of going trudging over the snow and ice in search of missing people. But something deep inside Grace stirred restlessly. They had seen no soul the previous day, and her feelings were they would find none today. The village was as dead as the first part of its name, and that was the problem. The sinking feeling that an entire community could just disappear cut at her nerves. "We'll take that," Brent said, pointing. On the far side of the road, a snow-covered 4x4 had been parked on some open ground nestled by 2 trucks. They crossed the road, leaped a drain, and Brent pulled at the door. It was naturally locked. "What are we going to do now?" Smith asked. Brent cleared the snow from the driver's side window with a quick brush, unholstered his automatic, and with the butt struck the glass, smashing it in. He looked at the others. "It's this or we walk." He reached under the dash, and a minute later the engine spluttered into life. Grace gave him a cool look. "They teach you that in the FBI." Brent smiled. The road out of Deadhorse ran north under a blanket of snow and ice. Before long, it had grown heavier, and no one was sure they were on it anymore as they sped across the sweeping ground. Charlie was beside Brent in the front, and Grace was wedged between the soldiers at the back. The frozen wind blew in from the open window and stung her eyes. They teared up, blurring her vision. The 4x4 skidded more than once on the ice, and Grace took small comfort that she was sandwiched between two big lumps of meat. Hopefully, if they ran off the road, they would act as a barricade to death. They passed lonely buildings, frozen lakes, big rigs, and cars, till they reached the vast Arctic of the north and could drive no further. Beyond the land, the ocean was buried below the snow and ice. A stark wind struck their faces, and the blue ocean had turned to white land. They stood at the end of the world as another gunshot cracked distantly. "It's over the ice," Charlie said, staring out blankly. "Hunters," Smith said coolly, as if he knew something no one else did. "Inuit hunting seals, possibly. They travel far out on the ice this time of year." "Have you ever been this far north before?" Grace questioned him. "Once when I was a child, in summer," Smith replied. "That was a long time ago, though." Elias was skimming the horizon with a pair of binoculars. "There's nothing out there that I can see. Sound travels further on the ice, and gunshots will appear closer than they are. They could be 20 miles away for all we'd know." Although early morning, a darkness hung over the day, and to the north the sky was even darker. This worried Grace. Throughout the base, there was no shortage of people willing to share their stories of horror. Despite not being a native Alaskan, she knew out of the clearest day a storm or blizzard could blow in, violent and merciless, taking all by surprise. "We can't go out there," Grace said, staring aimlessly at the white. "We don't know how thick the ice is or where the gunshots came from. We need to investigate the rest of Deadhorse. There are still buildings that are left unexplored." There were no objections. The vast ice had a bleakness to it where none of them wanted to go. Grace could see it in their faces. For more than a few minutes they shivered in the cold, in hopeful anticipation of further gunshots. But with none forthcoming, they drove back to Deadhorse to investigate the town. It was mid-morning when they entered the village again. They parked up near the apartment block. The wind was blowing in a dusting of snow, and despite their thick clothing, Grace knew each could feel the cold. She buttoned her parka to the last button and fastened the pull cords on the hood. Still, the wind caught her eyes, stinging them and tearing them up. Brent was looking over them, sizing them up. "I'll take the west," he said. "Charlie, you go east." He turned and pointed to a windswept ridge. "Grace, see if there's anything in those buildings to the south. Smith and Elias, head north. If you get into trouble or find something, fire a shot in the air." The word shot alarmed Grace, and she found herself brushing a reassuring palm over the leather holster of her pistol. When they had left Anchorage, no one expected to find a dead town, but that was what was waiting for them, and Grace was now grateful for the weapon. She looked to the south. The windswept ridge he was referring to was a few hundred feet from their camp. Hardly a walk at all in good weather, but this was Alaska, and 3 days ago a storm had brought heavy snow. The snow on the road was lighter, but it went nowhere near the ridge. When it met the hills, it became an unpleasant foot and a half high, and Grace struggled with each step. Why couldn't he have given her the east or west with its roads, she thought. There wasn't much to the south that Grace could see. A few simple wooden buildings perched on some barren wasteland, though as she moved to the rise she halted suddenly. There was an unpleasant smell on the crest that caught her nose. From the rise she could see a building beyond the bank. The climb was awkward, the snow was heavier than she expected, and her boots sank with each step. As she crested the ridge it became deeper still, maybe 2 feet or more, and she halted at the door of the building. She gave it a hefty shove, but it stood firm, locked. The building appeared to be one that had been built somewhere else and dumped there. The smell was blowing from a southerly wind, and she trudged around the building to the south side of it, and when she turned a corner she saw what had caused the smell. Dogs, or what was left of them, she presumed. There must have been 20 corpses spread out in equal distances, chained by metal spikes to the earth. Charlie was certain the dogs had met their fate, collared, snarling, and frightened. There was no skin left, and the skeletons were held together by only gristle and the odd bit of muscle. Soaked deep into the snow around each body was the blood and hair of the animals. She knelt beside the first one she came to. The animal had been butchered and the bones stripped bare, but that was not what startled Grace the most. The little flesh that had been left beside the body from whatever had committed the killings was black, tough, and veiny. Not the rosy red and white color of normal meat and fat that should have been found on a frozen carcass. She was still knelt when a putrid, eye-watering stench hit her nose, and Grace felt she might heave, but managed to hold her stomach. She stood slowly, looking over the rest of the dogs. Lying on the snow were tufts of white and black fur. Huskies, sled dogs, Grace thought, slaughtered while chained, but who or what would do such a thing to poor animals? Grace drew her pistol, raised the weapon in the air, and let off a round to a ringing crack that echoed from horizon to horizon. Others would be there soon to join her in the mystery. Grace didn't venture into the pack but stood back, moving her eyes from dog to dog. Each was the same as the last with the exception of one. At the far end, one of the bodies was mostly complete from what she could see. It took some time, but then the sound of boots squeaking in snow and Charlie and Brent appeared beside her out of breath. The three of them looked over the scene in horrified silence. "What went on here?" Charlie finally asked. "Someone killed these dogs and took their flesh," Grace replied. "Someone or something?" Brent added. "Maybe a bear or a hungry pack of wolves got in there, tore the animals apart." "Surely the man had seen the snow." "Not something," Grace said. "Look at the snow," she said, pointing in a wide arc. "No bear or wolf tracks, only the footprints of people and more than one." The ground lay scattered in footprints of no order. "Could have been a bear," Brent said. "Those footprints look days old and it snowed heavy last night." It was still snowing lightly. "Some of the prints look big enough to be bear prints," Brent added. "Could have been the animals were killed at night and people came in the morning." Although Charlie was silent, Grace could tell she agreed with her verdict. "Explains why they were tied up. Have you examined a carcass yet?" Grace shook her head. "No, I was waiting for you. You're the FBI. This is your investigation. Did you find anybody?" "There's not a soul or body for that matter on the west side," Brent said solemnly. "That I could find, only more blood trails." "Neither the east," added Charlie. "I've found no one to the south either. So unless Elias and Smith have found anybody, it means this town is deserted." "Abandoned," Charlie said. "Or they died here," Grace added with more than a hint of sarcasm in her voice. The thought of a whole community just leaving didn't sit well with her. In the buildings she had seen, there were no signs they had been abandoned. "There's one dog that hasn't been stripped. I was waiting for you," at the end of the pack. They left in a single line with Brent forging a path. Either side of them, mutilated bodies of the poor animals lay twisted and unnatural. Grace noticed one of the animals they passed had its spine rot so badly it reminded her of the roots of some great oak. When they were halfway down, Brent stopped abruptly with Charlie almost falling into him. He reached down and when he rose, he held a girl's slipper. He turned to them with a dark face and held the shoe out for inspection. It was the kind of slipper a girl would wear around the house. Soft fabric in no way suited for the cold Alaskan wilderness. "The child that wore this can't have been more than 10 or 11, Brent said. "And who would wear a slipper out in this kind of weather?" Brent turned the shoe slowly. "Look, there's blood," Charlie said too calmly for Grace's liking. The bottom of the shoe was covered in a frost of crimson. Grace looked at the pattern of blood, smudged she thought, then she looked at Brent. "There's no sense to this." "The child walked out into the snow and stepped on the blood of the dogs and then lost her shoe. Is that what happened? And what would a child be doing in Deadhorse anyway?" Brent silently handed the shoe to Charlie. "It's possible the child fled into the snow away with the blood already on her shoes and it froze like that," Charlie said. After a few seconds, Charlie offered the shoe to Grace, and after a shake of Grace's head threw it back into the snow. The sound of chatter made them all turn. Cresting the hill were Elias and Smith. "We heard the shot," Smith said, hollering before they saw the slain dogs. "What the hell are those things?" "Dogs, or what's left of them," Grace replied before they started walking again. They made it to the end of the massacre with Elias and Smith catching up before they crowded around the carcass, all peering down. This dog was dead like the rest, but not stripped like the others. Only a couple of bite marks could be seen. Grace's presumption they were huskies was right. The dog had somehow half buried itself in the snow and unlike the other dogs had striking pure white fur. "Why isn't this one bare bones like the rest?" Brent said. The question had already crossed Grace's mind. Maybe because it was the only pure white dog, it somehow survived hidden and froze to death. Charlie kicked the carcass a couple of times. It buried itself in the snow. "Maybe trying to escape." "Escape from what?" Elias said. "The cold." "Wolves," said Smith. "A pack of wolves will rip a dog apart or a man for that matter. I've heard about that happening to people in the forest in winter. The animals begin to starve and they will attack anything. I even heard stories of them killing bears." Grace knew Smith was an Alaskan. Often on his days off, he would go hunting in the woods for days at a time, or that's what he told people anyway. "It has to be more than that." "Those bites are not enough to kill the animal," Smith said. Elias looked unhappy that Smith had disagreed with him. "So what killed it then?" "I don't see any bullet marks on its body," Grace pointed out. "Let's find out," Charlie said as she took a step forward, bent down, and with a fistful of fur turned the animal. The underside of the creature revealed its cause of death. Deep chunks of flesh were torn from its body all along its abdomen. "That's what killed it," she said, looking up to bewildered faces. Charlie made a grimacing face, poked the black flesh a couple of times, then wiped the blood that wet the tip of her finger in the snow before standing. This wasn't wolves, Grace said disturbingly. Look at the bite marks on its body, I would swear they're human. The words brought on a sudden silence throughout the group until Elias broke it with horror. Look, he said, pointing. Drugs. There in the snow were dozens of lines of disorderly footprints, all heading away from the dogs and out into the desolate tundra. To Grace, they looked like a children's scribble on a piece of paper. In amongst them were spots of blood. Charlie looked at Brent somberly. We need to investigate those tracks. Whoever killed these dogs went that way. Brent gave an acknowledging shake of his head. Elias looked them over in astonishment. Come on, he said. Are you trying to tell me people ate these dogs alive and walked off into the snow? An arm raised and a finger pointed in the direction of the footsteps. They were about to start walking when Grace stopped them. Wait, she said, alarmed. We don't know who or what is out there. Days are short here in the Arctic Circle. Darkness is coming within the hour and you want to go trudging through frozen snow searching for God knows what. For a moment, she thought Brent was going to agree with her, but then he turned and started walking. It's our job, was all he said. We'll be back before darkness falls, Charlie reassured them. Grace looked at the soldiers. Elias shrugged and Smith seemed to not care at all, and then they set off after Brent and Charlie with Grace in the rear. They hadn't been walking far when they crested a gentle rise, and the ground sprawled out vast and frozen in front of them. The footsteps they had been following vanished mysteriously a few hundred feet in front of them. Brent had stopped and they fanned out around him. There's nothing out here, Grace said. Let's return to the village before nightfall. There's something out there, Elias replied adamantly. He had the binoculars to his eyes searching the white. There's another dog out there, about 500 feet away. Is it dead? Brent asked. Elias lowered the binoculars and handed them to Brent. Can't say, it doesn't seem to be moving. Brent spent a few seconds with his eyes through the lens. It's a short distance, I'm going out. You army guys can go back if you like. Grace looked at the sky. The sun only had a handful of minutes left before it would fall below the horizon, and the thought of being out on the ice alone unnerved her. As far as she was concerned, the frozen land had given up its secrets, and none were pleasant, but she understood the man. The FBI had been ordered to investigate, and they wanted answers. They marched out, each following in the other's footsteps. Grace was last, and by the time her foot struck snow, it had been flattened nice and hard. When they reached it, the creature lay motionless. It was not a dog, though, but a wolf. Unlike the dogs, this creature was whole, without a wound to show for itself. This is a wolf, not a dog, Elias said, stating the obvious. They stood over it, and Smith tapped it gingerly with his boot as if the creature may still be alive. It's been here a while, feels frozen solid, he said. There's no blood or bite marks, Charlie noted. How do you think it died? Grace looked to the north. Brooding clouds were over the ocean, far away for the moment, but it wouldn't stay like that. A puzzled look came over Smith's face. What do we do now? He asked unashamedly. Grace had had enough of dead dogs, wolves, and mysteries for one day. It called for action. She pulled her knife from its sheath, dropped to her knees, and with a determined swish, opened the wolf up from abdomen to tail. To everyone's amazement, the flesh split like a log, but that was it. Innards spilled out onto the icy snow, but no blood. What the hell? Charlie said, crouching to get a better look. Why is there no blood? She touched the fur of the creature and her hand sunk into its body. It's not frozen. It must have died recently. She looked at Smith. In this temperature, Smith added thoughtfully, then the last few hours. Grace lifted the skin and cut away a deep slice, revealing black fleshy meat, riddled with wormy dark veins. Shockingly, even the fat was black for a reason she couldn't comprehend. Above her, Charlie whispered with an air of confusion in her voice, black meat. Then louder, it's the same as the dogs, she said. Something has turned the flesh black. Cut more away, Brent asked impatiently. Grace looked up at him, then sliced the skin beyond the midriff as near to the wolf's spine as she could, till the blade struck bone. The same thought Grace, as black as an Alaskan winter's night with the thick roots of a tree running through it. The blood was congealed in the veins. Charlie's words echoed a strange dark thought inside her, as black and awful as the meat she stared down upon. The wolf had been poisoned. She thrust the blade into the snow a few times until it came out clean and then rose to her feet before sheathing the knife. We need to take this back with us, Brent said. This is evidence. It's a dead wolf, said Elias. Brent stared at them pertinaciously. It's more than a dead wolf, look at the meat. Elias and Smith exchanged glances. You can carry it back if you like, we're in the army, not in the FBI. This is your investigation, Smith said. Brent started to bend down to pick it up before Charlie took his arm firmly. Wait, she said, that meat is poisoned. The sun is going down, why don't we get the 4x4 and pick it up tomorrow? Grace was already looking back to Dead Horse with a wishful look. "She's right, Brent. Let's leave it for the night and return tomorrow. If it's poison, you don't want to touch it. We'll find a tarp and wrap the body." The words must have made sense to him, or perhaps it was the thought of carrying it back by himself, because he gave a slight nod of agreement, then turned to the north. The walk back was in silence to falling light. A bitter north wind was howling, and a light snow began to fall with equal temperatures. On the bleak snow, Grace had looked over the faces, and each was as bewildered as the next. Whatever had killed the dogs and wolf and turned the flesh black was a mystery she didn't want to find out on the frozen Alaskan land. In fact, her only thoughts were of getting back to the safety of Elmendorf and Tyler. The man she was kind of dating.